Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist live program. I'm Laurie Gaylor, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And I'm Liz Cavell, a constitutional attorney here at FFRF.
On today's program, we're going to talk about the issue dominating the news in the past few weeks, the assault on abortion rights.
So if you want to participate, ask a question, make a comment, please type it right here in the comments on the Facebook page, or you can email it to askanatheist@ffrf.org. We'd love to hear from you.
And yesterday, May 21st, was declared the National Day of Action to Stop Abortion Bans. Protests kicked off in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and are continuing throughout the week around the country. And we have some footage of those protests aimed directly at the justices who eventually will be deciding the fate of the landmark decision, Roe v. Wade.
That's right. Emboldened by the addition of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, the religious right's avowed goal is to flood the court system with anti-abortion legislation. Their goal is to get a case before the Supreme Court to eventually overturn Roe versus Wade. And to recap developments, just this May, the state of Georgia on May 7th became the fourth state to pass a so-called fetal heartbeat ban, a bill banning abortion at 6 weeks of pregnancy before most women would realize that they're pregnant.
And of course, this is a misnomer because you have neither a fetus nor a heartbeat. You have an embryo and you have electric activity. So this law has an even more chilling effect in that the Georgia law grants personhood to a conceptus, and this means, for example, that a woman in early pregnancy would count as two persons. You'll have all these absurd situations. You could take tax deductions for this quote-unquote child, and potentially the state could prosecute a woman who has a suspicious miscarriage for murder.
Right. And next, we saw the state of Alabama last week adopting an outright ban on abortion. In that bill, physicians can be imprisoned for up to 99 years for performing an abortion. There is no exception for rape or incest. It's obviously an unconstitutional law, and of course, that's the point. We loved this footage of the floor debate where two of Alabama's female senators protested the bill.
This bill is not about pro-life or the right to life. This bill is about control. People are going to have abortion. The problem is it's going to always be unsafe, inaccessible for those people who have lesser means. We all know about the back alleys, the basements. People will try going online now. How you can mix a concoction to have an abortion.
But why you all want to control our bodies, I will never, ever know. You know, you all are always trying to put the laws on us. I want you all to vote for this one so we can have some equality about this thing, okay? Mr. President, I offer this amendment.
All right, Secretary Reed, receive the
long
amendment.
roll call vote. I saved the best for last.
Amendment to House Bill 314 by Senator Figures. On page 8, after line 15, insert the following new subsections C and D. C, a man who has a vasectomy shall be guilty of a Class A felony. D, a man who attempts to have a vasectomy shall be guilty of a Class C felony.
Urge you to vote no, members.
Using the long roll call vote. You're talking about life.
All right, Secretary, call the roll.
So that was obviously making a point. Nobody's trying to interfere with men's reproductive rights. The religious motivation behind these bills, particularly the Alabama ban, is very clear. The Alabama bill sponsor said he'd been praying for this bill. Another sponsor said God creates that life, that miracle of life within the woman's womb. It's not our place as humans to distinguish that life. And I have to say, you never hear talk of wombs except with abortion. It's a uterus.
Right. And Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, when she signed the abortion ban into law, said that the law, quote, stands as a powerful testament to Alabamans' deeply held belief that every life is precious, that every life is a sacred gift from God.
And what's wrong with this picture? These public officials are free to believe as they like, but not to inflict, through legislation, their faith-based beliefs upon the rest of us unwilling people. Although a Republican woman governor signed this bill, we have to point out that the Alabama Senate contains only 4 women, and women are only 15% of the Alabama legislature. 25 of the 27 Republicans in the Senate who dominate that 35-member Alabama chamber, all white men, voted in lockstep for this virtual ban. And 2 of those Republicans who didn't vote just weren't there.
Right, right. Last Friday, the legislature in Missouri passed a ban on abortion at 8 weeks, and the governor there is expected to sign that bill momentarily, and again, with no exceptions for rape or incest. Next, after that, will come the state of Louisiana, where the Democratic governor has said he'll break party rank to sign another so-called fetal heartbeat bill.
So no wonder women and reproductive rights advocates have been protesting all over the nation. FFRF's cartoonist, Steve Benson, has done some powerful cartoons for us. This is the cartoon with a Handmaid's Tale theme, obviously, and it kind of encapsulates how assaultive this tsunami of bills feels to women in the United States.
Right, and this one is Steve's take on the goal of the anti-abortionists to overturn Roe v. Wade, whether incrementally or all at once. Here, you'll note,
That's Lady Liberty.
Lady Liberty
on the Supreme Court.
Yep. Is in real trouble here on the Supreme Court in this cartoon. Roe versus Wade will have its 50th anniversary in 2023, and the question we're asking is, will it even exist by then?
And it can happen here. I came back from a brief trip to Poland in April, very freaked out, because at one time, Poland was a reproductive rights beacon in Europe, with Polish women enjoying the rights of reproductive freedom dating back to the 1950s. Women in Europe used to go to Poland when it wasn't legal other places. And then these Polish women watched helplessly as abortion rights were stripped away in front of their eyes by 1993, and that abortion there remains illegal except for very extreme cases. And you can see I'm marching in Warsaw dressed in Handmaid's Tale garb. And women's rights were sacrificed as part of the political union between the Solidarity government and the Catholic Church. And today Poland has among the strictest rules on abortion in the world. It's only legal in extreme cases, as I noted. And so let's learn a lesson from Poland. Yes, it can happen, and it is happening here. And there's 2 of us, Whitney Steffen, our legal assistant, and I are up at the gallery. The Wisconsin legislature last week when they passed 4 anti-abortion bills. Now those will be vetoed by our Democratic governor, but still, we wanted to make a message.
Right. So Annie, Laurie, I know you've said that the Freedom from Religion Foundation owes its existence to the abortion rights movement. Tell us about that.
Yes, it was, my mother was a feminist volunteer, and she was working to legalize abortion in Wisconsin and really decriminalize it, and contraceptive rights for unmarried people. And I was in junior high school following her around the state as she was campaigning for legal abortion. And it opened up both of our eyes to the real enemy of women's rights and reproductive rights. It is organized religion. It is the sole organized enemy of abortion rights and contraceptive rights. And we would see the Wisconsin State Capitol rotunda filled with bussed-in school children, nuns and priests, and all the testimony would begin, the Bible says abortion is murder. Of course, the Bible doesn't say that, but it was still that religious rationale. And my mother felt there were many feminist groups, and they were working on this problem, but nobody was really getting at the root of the problem, which is the lack of separation between religion and government, that religion should not be in our statutes, it should not be dictating our social policy. It could have been something else that opened our eyes. We're not just, we're not an abortion rights group per se, but it's one of the many issues we're working on because it is the religious right trying to take away those rights. Right. So, and we have surveyed our members, and they're overwhelmingly pro-choice. This is a very important issue to our members.
Right.
Everyone can see that it's a religious issue because religion, religious dogma is behind it, this idea that you have ensoulment at conception.
Right.
So that's when you have a human being.
Right, and of course you hear that getting lip service by Governor Ivey, by these state legislators who are saying explicitly, this is about protecting God-given life, and who are we to interfere with, God-given life. And that's at the point of conception. The concept of ensoulment, that's a religious point of view.
It's something that you can take on faith, but you can't prove it.
Right.
It's fine if someone doesn't want to have an abortion because they have a religious objection, but they have no right to inflict their dogma on other people.
Right.
And they don't have boundaries.
Right.
These people.
Of course, this extends to, like you said, contraceptive access, which has been a crusade of the religious right for decades. And it also extends to sex education in this country, which is abysmal and a huge part of this problem, also driven largely or entirely by the religious right and the organized religious political movement against science-based sex education.
And I think you don't always see in the statutory language of these anti-abortion bills God. They don't always put a religious wording in the statute. They're smart enough not to do that, but They can't prevent themselves, as Governor Ivey did and so on, from constantly invoking the religious backing of this bill. Why? There are real feelings.
Right.
It is all religion. And so draconian. They would be putting physicians away for 99 years.
Right.
And, Trump at one point said he thought women should be jailed if they had abortions. So although they aren't saying that, I think that that can certainly happen next.
Right, right.
And
And
proposals.
right, that's right. And we're seeing it kind of come to pass. Trump sort of promised and forecasted that return to punitive, draconian abortion restrictions, and here we are living in it, and it's state by state becoming an all-out war on reproductive rights.
Yes. And so I think that I would also like to talk a little bit about the Women's Medical Fund and the abortion funds that are out there. The Women's Medical Fund was founded by my mother, Ann Gaylor, and Professor Bob West in the late 1970s when there was a cutoff of abortion funds for women on Medicaid in the state of Wisconsin after the Hyde Amendment first came down cutting off federal funds. And it's believed to be the longest continuously operating abortion rights fund in the country. And we helped 975 low-income women last year pay for abortions partially. We don't pay for the whole thing. It's a huge need. Abortion Roe versus Wade isn't really legal for women who are on medical assistance if it cuts off. It's what we all face now. And we would love to have some funds for that. I know that this whole week, Pro-Choice Week, the national groups are urging people to donate to abortion funds in their areas. And in Wisconsin, we would love to have help for the Women's Medical Fund. It's an all-volunteer group, and all the money goes to pay for abortion care.
Right.
And so I think the address is coming up. It's women. You can look for womensmedicalfundwisconsin.org. There is another Women's Medical Fund in Pennsylvania, so be sure you go to the Wisconsin one, although they, I'm sure, need help too. And that's a very practical way that somebody can fight back against all of these restrictions.
Right. That's direct funding of abortions and helping, of course, the women who are hardest hit by these awful draconian laws are women who are already in marginalized groups, rural communities, poor communities, women of color. And so that's a huge problem here in Wisconsin, like so many states with conservative-dominated legislatures. So please donate to the Women's Medical Fund. And I really don't want to go past talking about WMF and your mom, Ann Gaylor, its founder, without talking about her book, which is sitting right here next to us.
And she
when
wrote,
was this written?
76, I think. Women Without Abortion is a Blessing. And it's a compilation of the fight to legalize abortion in the state of Wisconsin. And she talks about the women that she used to counsel. She was always running a referral service, and she used to have to refer women to Mexico when abortion was illegal here. And there was actually a very good doctor in Mexico City, and there were different networks helping women, but then abortion was legalized early in Wisconsin from a federal court decision. But a clinic was raided here, people died. It was the whole story is in here, and then she always felt that the movement was missing the boat when not talking about women,
Right.
the effect of abortion bans on women, and what happens to them when they can't get abortions. So this is full of case histories.
Right. I've read this book a few times. It's out of print now, but you can read it on our website, ffrf.org. And it's really, really compelling because it is so from the trenches. Your mom, Ann Gaylor, worked with women trying to get referrals for where they could get help terminating unwanted pregnancies in a time that it's harrowing to read because she wrote it in the 70s, and it's really feels like a frightening
There was a lot of frightening times, especially when our DA raided the legal clinic and took all of the records, 350 records of women who had appointments. They were coming in from all different states and from northern Wisconsin, so nobody could be notified. And my mother was called to help these crying women, greet them and try to do something for them. And that's when the Women's Medical Fund started informally. It was a transportation fund. And some of the women were given aid to fly to New York State, which had legal abortion at that time. But then there was testimony given at the Capitol from a social worker about a teenage girl who aborted herself. There was more than one death. She died because of that raid,
right.
that
Resulting
illegal
in,
raid by a Catholic DA.
Hundreds of young women with appointments who, untold horrors befell them because they were left without any options.
I was about 14, and I still remember the crowds in the municipal building, the city, Madison City Council halls, filled with protesters. The whole city turned out to protest this draconian action. But this is what we could face again.
Right.
And in Wisconsin, we're one of about 9 states that still has a criminal sanction on the books, that if the Supreme Court were to turn this over to the states, abortion would immediately become criminal again. And although they did take off the criminal sanctions for women who have them, they are punishing doctors up to 6 years. And so, this is a very frightening time for people in Wisconsin when we think this is what the Supreme Court is most apt to do eventually.
Right.
Not ban it outright, say, it's a states' rights issue. Well, this isn't a states' rights issue.
Right.
This is a human rights issue. Shouldn't matter what state you live in.
Right. Your mom's book, she's writing it in the 70s, and she's seen so much horror, and she's really angry, but at the same time, it felt like it was a hopeful time.
Yes.
After Roe versus Wade and the opening up of legal abortion across the country. But just reading the stories, it really feels like it portends a really, really horrible time that we may likely be facing now.
We don't want to go back again.
Right.
So, and then let's end with the formal part of this program with a nod to Margaret Sanger.
Yes, she began the birth control movement. She even coined that term, and she pointed out that no woman can call herself free unless she may consciously decide whether to become a mother. And that's so true. And we want to open up the field now for any questions that we're getting on Facebook or any questions that we may have gotten through our email account. I feel we kind of answered this, but we got a question from Stephen Cross that says, if FFRF is a state church group, why does it concern itself with abortion? I think in large part, we talked about that as a huge concern of so many of our membership, and B, a massive denial of human rights to half the population that is solely rooted in religious opposition and religious dogma influencing government policy, which is FFRF's sole reason for existing.
Yeah, we can't just talk, we need to have a separation of church and state, and then see our country reverting to religious dogma on things like abortion rights or LGBTQ rights, or even vaccination, for example. These are are the issues of the day that show the harm of religion and government and policy. Right. We are not primarily a pro-choice group, but we are pro-choice. We're not primarily an LGBTQ rights group, but we are pro marriage equality and gay rights. And we're for vaccinations and so on. So it's a very important part of our work to be plugged into these vital issues of the day.
Right. And of course, we mentioned your mother, Ann Gaylor, founder of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, along with you. And something that I'm so proud of at FFRF is just the feminist heritage of our organization. And, you know, I do think that, you know, like it or not, women's rights and feminism is in our DNA.
That's a good way to put it.
So here we have a question that we could talk about a lot. Terrence Palmer asks, why is the religious right so obsessed with the issue of abortion and controlling reproduction? We talked earlier. Of course, we know it's not just abortion, it's contraceptive access, it's sex education. What do you think, when it comes down to it, why do you think this is such an important religious right
Terrence,
obsession?
I would say that if you can control women's reproduction, you control women. And if women cannot control their bodies, as Margaret Sanger pointed out, they can't control anything else. And control of women's bodies is what the Bible is predicated on. You only have to go to the 3rd chapter of Genesis before it says, "Thou shalt bring forth children in sorrow." It's like a sentence. Women's servitude, part of our sentence. Women are breeders to religion. That's our role in patriarchal Christianity.
Right. I mean, say what you will about the religious rights obsession with women's reproduction and sex, but you can't say that they're not getting it from their Bible. You know, I think the
servitude.
Right. The message is sort of being quite correctly interpreted by the religious right from their holy book that women are subordinate. They are for reproductive, you know, they exist for reproduction. And I think that's where this obsession comes from, and it's dogma.
You and I did an earlier Ask an Atheist about what the Bible says about abortion, and we can say nothing. It doesn't really say anything about abortion, and some of the anecdotes in it actually would support abortion rights, and the traditional Jewish concept is you have life when you have breath. But what the Bible does do is pound on women's inferiority, the idea of mandatory motherhood, that women are owned by men. So the misogyny in the Bible is very clear. Right. So I think that's where they get that. And
the idea of, and I think your mom talks about this so poignantly in her book, and it's so true. It's this idea that women should be punished. You know, that of pregnancy and childbearing as punishment, which of course we know is all tied up. You know, I mean, I sort of proudly did not pay attention in Catholic school. However, we know the story of Adam and Eve, and you know the idea of Eve's kind of original sin, and how you know, it's a punishment to all womankind. You know, her
curse.
Exactly. So I think there's, of course, this misogyny kind of bears itself out in the idea that childbearing is a punishment for women for their sins. And that's something that I think, you know, anti-abortionists sort of openly express when we talk about why should women be allowed to have abortions if they've, you know, gone off and gotten themselves pregnant,
yes,
you know.
And we used to hear that a lot. Mm-hmm. Gone off and gotten themselves pregnant.
As your mom talks about that in her book, which of course no woman ever, except Mary, of course, has gotten herself pregnant. So it's hard. But here's another question from Jolene Carroll asking, if the church is so vehemently against abortion, why are they also condemning contraception and comprehensive sex education? We know those have been both proven to reduce the number of abortions.
Good question.
Of course, that's a very compelling and obvious point.
It makes no sense unless you are looking at how the church regards women as breeders for reproduction only, and in that case, they're just supposed to be barefoot and pregnant. And of course, if you want to reduce abortions, what you should be doing is making sure there's complete accessibility to contraception.
Right.
But we see that being fought out right now. We thought contraceptive battle was concluded, and now we realize that it's a huge battleground with the Hobby Lobby decision that workers' choices could be vetoed by employers, that there might not be insurance coverage, and they're going after different forms of birth control as abortifacients, even though that's not even true.
Right.
So,
and to me, this is the big kind of tell on the religious purpose and drive behind, this political movement, because this is so sensible and empirically true. Contraceptive access and science-based sex education will reduce, the number of unintended pregnancies. But the fact that, you find political alignment amongst anti-abortionists and anti-contraceptive access and, abstinence-only education support just shows that this is really driven by religious, dogmatic views around conception and ensoulment and all the rest of it. So that to me is just what lays that so bare. You would think if you truly are concerned, a worthy societal goal would be reducing the number of unwanted and unintended pregnancies. I don't think that's very controversial, but.
And I can tell you that the clinics that we work with at the Women's Medical Fund work so hard to make sure that women know about their contraceptive choices. The intake volunteers at the Women's Medical Fund, it's on our questionnaire. What are you going to do in the future to keep from getting pregnant? Nobody wants repeat customers. The clinics don't want repeat customers. Who's ever heard people who don't want repeat customers? They try so hard to make sure that women have that access.
Right.
And of course, methods are imperfect. You will always need abortion, but our side is trying to prevent unwanted pregnancies.
Right. I mean, it is really a failure of education and access when it comes to why the number of unintended pregnancies is so high. Contraceptive access and lack of education around conception and sex education. Okay. I think we've got one more question. Cheryl Weaver, what can those of us who are horrified by the recent legislation being passed do to get involved in protecting abortion rights? Of course, we already plugged the Women's Medical Fund, but we should do it again.
Yes, and the protests this week, some of them have taken place yesterday, but you can go to hashtag Stop the Ban to see where there are protests in your area. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is doing our best to send out action alerts when there are anti-abortion bans in your state. If you remember, it really does mean something to contact your legislator, call their office, complain, call the governors.
Right.
If you're in one of those states such as Missouri,
right,
Louisiana, do what you can to support abortion rights groups and speak up.
Right. Donate to abortion funds in your area. It's really, state elections are really going to matter going forward in the next few years because, of course, it's sadly not a question of if, but when the U.S. Supreme Court will, at best, curtail abortion, federal constitutional abortion rights.
And for those of you who might still subscribe to a daily newspaper, don't overlook writing a letter to the editor. Don't overlook Facebook and social media to make your views heard. Letters to the editor that are published are very influential because your legislators will read those letters. So,
right.
You can turn out for protests, but also remember to make your voice heard that way.
Right. And I do think the silver lining here is that we are being woken up to how urgent this issue really is, because I think what a lot of us have sort of been maybe willfully blinding ourselves to is that, it's not just since Trump and Brett Kavanaugh that reproductive rights have been on the chopping block. It's really been a steady march over the past few decades.
Yes.
And really, Roe versus Wade has been hanging by a thread. And the reality for women in, like I said, rural communities, low-income communities, communities of color, and in so many conservative-dominated states across the country is there is no safe abortion access for those women
already,
and women who, it is really like the 70s where if you have cash and you have the ability to travel and the time, you probably have access to safe abortion. If you don't, you're already in a perilous
world.
situation, and that is the situation we're in. And Roe versus Wade, I heard someone else say somewhere in punditry, Roe versus Wade really is the compromise. There's nowhere left to give, I don't think, on the reproductive rights side.
And we should say a couple of positive things have happened. For example, this is the 1 year anniversary of the referendum that legalized abortion in Ireland. So, although I think it's only to 12 weeks in Ireland, and then they'd have to go over to the UK again. But that was a huge victory against the Catholic Church in that country.
Of course, a straight vote by the population, which would probably yield a similar result in the United States, because as we know, public opinion on this issue is completely out of step, like so many issues, with where most of our elected officials are standing on this issue.
And there's also, for example, Vermont is moving to adopt a constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights. And this would be a way that some of the more liberal states could protect abortion rights. But again, we don't want to go back to those days when abortion was illegal in most of the states.
Right.
And only a lucky few women in these particular states got this human right, this civil right.
Right.
We are going to have to make a big fuss.
Quite right. Well, that is our last question, Laurie.
And so now on to some happier news. FFRF's Director of Strategic Response, Andrew Seidel, is on tour promoting his new book, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. And where are you joining us from today, Andrew?
I am in Greenville, South Carolina right now, which is right near Spartanburg, which we've sued, and Clemson, which we've tangled with a couple times. So I'm speaking to a local humanist group here tonight, and then tomorrow I'm heading to Atlanta to talk to the FFRF chapter there.
So how's it going?
It's going pretty well so far. On Sunday, I was in Knoxville. About 100 people showed up. It was a really nice crowd that came out. After Knoxville, I ended up in Raleigh. There was about a crowd of, I would guess, between 50 and 60 there. And then Charleston, South Carolina last night. In Charleston, there were maybe 30 or 40 people showed up. A small event at a local public library. Really great groups of people. Strong local activists, and they asked a lot of really good questions about the book and seemed very interested in it. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. It's been fun so far. You get to meet a lot of really interesting folks.
That photograph of you in the room with the windows, that's with our Triangle Free Thought Society, isn't it?
Correct. That was the Raleigh chapter. This is in Knoxville with the FFRF chapter in Tennessee, and then the Rationalists of East Tennessee. This is Jen, who wanted to get a photo afterwards. This is a bunch of the members of the board and some of the other attendees. My buddy Dan is somewhere hidden in that photo. And then this was doing the book signing afterwards. So it was a pretty sizable crowd. It's been really a great experience so far.
Very cool. And Andrew's book is about Christian nationalism, the myth of Christian nationalism in our country. And of course, Christian nationalism is certainly tied up in what we've been talking about today, which is
absolutely
the deprivation of reproductive rights for women in America. So
in the name of Christianity, I'm getting people are really angry about it. I can tell you I'm getting a ton of questions about it every day. The event last night was at the same time as the protest in Charleston, and they said that a lot of people skipped it to go to the protest, which I sympathize with. I didn't realize. I would have headed down there at the same time had I known. But anyway, so it's people are really angry about it. I watched the whole show, and you guys did a great job explaining it, and it's a really scary time right now.
If you're in the Madison area, the protest is going to be Thursday night from 6 to 8 at the Capitol. And we have some extra Handmaid's Tale costumes. So we're anxious to get a big crowd out to protest this in Wisconsin, where we do need to overturn that ban on abortion rights. We really need to galvanize the public. Right.
Andrew, one more time, for anyone who might be watching, where are you going to be tonight? Where are you going to be tomorrow? Where can people see you out there in the South?
So Greenville tonight, Atlanta on Thursday night, and then actually heading out of the Bible Belt to Seattle on Sunday to do a talk at the Barnes & Noble at Northgate there. And that one I'm pretty excited about. Seattle could be a really good crowd. And then later on in June, near the end of June, I'm doing a couple events in Florida with the Central Florida Free Thought community, and then an event down in Boca Raton.
And you'll be speaking You'll be speaking at the 42nd Annual Convention of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is October 18th and 19th in Madison.
I'm really excited about that one. Sharing a stage with Sarah Vowell is kind of crazy to me. That's exciting.
Yes, you can keep up with where Andrew is, Dan Barker, who does a lot of traveling, and all of FFRF's great people on the road, also at our website at ffrf.org. Thanks for checking in, Andrew. I hope the rest of the tour goes great. And
thank you for being on.
Yeah, and hey, Dan and I will be in Iceland next week.
Oh my gosh!
So there's a meeting of the Humanists International, and then there's the Icelandic meeting before that.
That'll be great.
So maybe we'll report on that.
Oh, that'll be great. So yeah, follow us and all of our goings on at ffrf.org. That is about it for this week's Ask an Atheist. And as always, we would like to offer you the chance to help FFRF in our important work. And one easy way to do that is to join our text alert system. You can text FFRF to 52886, and we'll let you know when there's legislation in your area that you can weigh in on by contacting your legislators. Data rates may apply, and again, you can text FFRF to 52886 to get information in your area.
And we are always happy to welcome new members, so we would love to have you join us today. You can go to our website at ffrf.org and learn more about us and find out how to become a member, and we'd be glad to send you a sample issue of our newspaper. If you just click on that link, ask for information. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.